right. Happy Friday. I'm back, as you can see, back in the, the home office. The green screen. Hey, Ian. Hey, WJ. Ian's playing a Zelda, maybe the new Zelda. I probably will download that today, even though I never finished Breath of the Wild. I've heard good things about this new one. I don't know if Breath of the Wild pained me to put it down, but the weapons breaking all the time just drove me bananas. And I know that's not going away, but I've seen some of the videos with some of the stuff that you can do in this new game, and it's kind of made me feel like maybe that will make up for the fact that I just would get so frustrated with uh with tool breakages and just constantly having to cycle through that stuff, that I'll give it another shot. um WJFs, that was AI art. Yeah, I've been messing around. So on the AI art front, as you probably know, I've done a lot of fooling around with Midjourney, which I appreciate a lot. But lately, I've been messing around with Stable Diffusion, which is another, I guess, similar type of AI generator. Stable Diffusion. So Midjourney is a service, right? So you and uses Discord, basically a bot which connects to their API. So you are putting a prompt into the Discord bot, which sends it over the service, does its crunching, comes back to you. So the pluses of this Midjourney type model is that your computer itself doesn't matter at all, right? You could be on your phone, and I've done it many times. Sat around on my phone, had Discord open, chatting with the Midjourney bot and cranking out images. But it's a closed box. Midjourney, it's a for-profit company. You don't other than stuff that they improve, you don't get to do a lot. I know folks have messed around with being able to generate kind of specific things, but it's kind of using workarounds, and they're still pretty limited. You can only kind of do so much, because you're sort of captive to whatever Midjourney does in terms of how they want to how they want to develop the software to begin with, and what they allow, what they don't allow. Now, Stable Diffusion, you can run it on in the cloud, so to speak. But I think there are services. Maybe there's some services that use Stable Diffusion, but the big advantage is you can run Stable Diffusion sort of even. There are these kind of Google Collab, I think, is the thing where you can run scripts basically using cloud computers as opposed to computers, but just your home computer, but you still have a lot of on the ground kind of code access as opposed to a very polished service. And I don't think the Stable Diffusion, the models are as advanced as Midjourney. I think Midjourney, you can get some really incredible stuff with a lot less input and tweaking than I think in Stable Diffusion for the most part. And maybe I'm just still very used to the way Midjourney does things, and I haven't caught up to how I should be doing things for Stable Diffusion. However, the advantage of Stable Diffusion is it is super, super customizable. So you can do things like create these little mini models, and all these different, some of them can be styles, some of them can be people, all kinds of different things. You can play around with lots of different models that have different strengths and weaknesses, and people are making them, cranking them out. There are some neat ones. Maybe I'll go over it at some point. There's some neat ones people have done that really emphasize like RPG art, that are sort of, I guess, specialize in getting good RPG type characters and landscapes and things like that. And you can really play around with a lot of different things. You can do things like, they have kind of extensions and things you can add so that you can have much more control over your scene setting. Whereas in Midjourney, I could maybe throw in an image and try to get it to be like that image. But in Stable Diffusion, I can use tools that can get me a lot closer to, if I really want to follow a particular type of image in terms of the layout, in terms of how things are presented in an image, then you can do that. And one of the ones that I did was, I love the movie The 13th Warrior, and there's a scene in The 13th Warrior when, if you're familiar with it all, Bulvi, they go first to meet up with the local lord, and so that the scene that is the thumbnail is an interpretation of that image where I've been put in the Bulvi spot, more or less. And it took some doing. It wasn't like I was able to do it cleanly in one prompt. It took me a lot of kind of finagling, and I still keep going back, wanting to tweak it and look at it. But maybe I'll do a video on one point. It's It's not as clean as Midjourney, but it's interesting. But I don't know. The other thing though too is that like the prompts, it's not quite like Midjourney. Like it's hard for me to say like here's the prompt for this thing because it's really like the prompt is important, but then also what model you're using and then your seed value, which is just a random number, and you just kind of hope that you luck into the right seed. And you could do some of that in Midjourney. People play around with the seeding and things too. And then there are other sliders you're controlling. So there's a lot. There's a lot to it, but it is fun. And so I made a model kind of myself. And then involves basically taking a bunch of pictures of yourself and kind of describing them. And then you create this model, and then you can kind of put it into things. So I can do something like my Lone Wolf Wednesdays. I took a picture of Indiana Jones and kind of subbed myself for Indiana Jones. And you know, you can, again, there are lots of sliders and things. It's a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun doing it. I think my wife now thinks I'm some kind of egomaniac because I keep putting myself in images, but it's just kind of, it's fun. I don't take it seriously. Another Ian says some of the GAN are really producing impressive results. Basically, 2 different neural nets correcting each other's work. Still in the lab though. Yeah, I bet. I mean, I'm on the, in terms of running it locally. Like I'm on the low end of I can run it, but it's not. I'm not like I don't have like a gangbuster system. You really need a lot of everything's been running on GPU. That's kind of where at least like Stable Diffusion, a lot of these things are running. Is they really take up your. So you really need to have a good GPU, and that GPU with a lot of VRAM. So I think I have 8 gigs of VRAM right now, and I can run them, but it's not like I can do gangbusters. But you could still get good results. You can still get. There are different. There are different ways of getting kind of more high res versions. Anyway, didn't mean to get off on a tangent, but it's fun stuff. I recommend it. If you have a sort of a newer graphics card, I think people got them wrong with AMD stuff, but it seems to be that it's easiest and maybe the GeForce chips are the ones that are most, the NVIDIA stuff are the ones that are most common, most supported. And you're not gaming, you're not doing other stuff because it could eat up a ton of not just your obviously your VRAM when you're running this stuff, but the models and things are huge. 3 gigabytes, 6 gigabytes, 9 gigabytes. I mean, you can, they're big. So you start throwing those on your hard drive, and you can eat up some hard drive space fast. And that's not even including just generating tons of images. So the images are pretty well compressed; they're not too big. All right. Well, let me get to it. Boop. Here we go. Here we go. I'll give it get a refresh. Let's see if we have anything. So something that None Nothing, friend of the channel, None Nothing, mentioned was I'm continually putting call outs to the community for giving me stuff to talk about so that I don't have to resort to just reading random stuff off the internet. And I don't get very much back. And he suggested maybe putting out a call for a specific thing and seeing if folks want to submit it for us to look at on the channel as a stream. So I'm going to put out that call, and I'll write up a post for it, and I'll put it on the forums, which is where I'm going to funnel people to actually post their things, because you can do attachments, you can do things. That's one of my issues with the YouTube channel community tab is fine, but it's kind of half baked, and it just doesn't have a lot of features. It could do a few things, but it's not super fully featured. So I'll probably use the forums for that, but I'll link that out. So if you have, and I'll see what the response is also. If you have a magic item that you've created for your game that you want to share, we can go through that. Bullet Catcher says a magical medieval society. That's a book? I think that's a book. It's a very interesting book. Okay. Are you just mentioning it to mention it? Is it something that's appearing somewhere here on the page? I don't see it. But I do want to see this. This looks intriguing. This is entitled Software for Creating a Custom Hypertext/Hypermedia Hex Crawl. Posted by Minzart. Hi all, I fell in love with tabletop RPGs and started my own sandbox hex crawl campaign with homebrew rules. So far, so good. Have a 25 by 20 map, 6 mile hexes, charted, complete with one mega dungeon and several mini dungeons, and have ran instances for friends as well as played solo adventures in it. As you can imagine, my physical binder and materials are becoming unwieldy, yet most of my play is done by typing into markdown files anyway. My goal is to move my physical map into a digital space, not only so I can avoid flipping through a binder to look for keys, but also to let others play in and borrow from my settings. I have the idea to let my friends play solo and then tell me what happens so I can update the world accordingly. Twine and Inkle Writer have served me well for journaling point crawl style solo play, but I really miss the ability to move around a map at a glance. Ideally, I want to be able to have either a hex map or a good abstraction of one that allowed for hyperlinked keys with additional information. I can implement this on an interactive fiction software using loops and additional information, but this seems like it will get unwieldy fast, especially as I start putting my dungeons online. At one point, I was making an improvised hex map using the canvas view in Obsidian, but I got super annoying trying to link the hexes together. Also, I have a Midjourney subscription. I want to be able to key a hex map with more than just text. So right now, I am searching for a software that, has some bullet points, has automatically linked hexes, abstract or graphical, that allows for 6-directional navigation, allows hyperlinks, nested information, and images for each hex, is hosted online, or is easy to host myself online. Does the software even exist? What are your solutions? Oh, and there's nothing here. Obsidian is good for Markdown. Oh, and there's a leaflet plugin. I'm not going to, if you go to this, if you have a chance to go to that thing and comment, I was hoping there'd be comments here. I probably should have looked and saw that there was none. Oh, Bullet Catcher owns it. I see. I might have to check it. I've heard about Magical Medieval Society, but I haven't checked it out. Yeah, Obsidian I've seen, and maybe that leaflet plugin will work better for that canvas view. Yeah, there should be something good. I mean, it's kind of what some of the I kind of feel like the ultimate thing would be to have a wiki, just get a docu-wiki kind of. I don't know about the hyperlinking from maps to images in terms of you could probably just have to set up a canvas, but I feel like some kind of media wiki type server would just be pretty much, except for the map part, would be pretty much exactly what you'd want. What mods or hacks to use for OSE Lamentations and BX other BX style games? I keep telling people, I really wish people wouldn't just start looking for. I'm going to read this one because I'm curious if they actually have a goal. But this idea that you should just pull out hacks when you don't have an idea of what you're trying to do is a little bit weird to me, anyway. But this was posted by Miso82. Interested in OSE as a fairly accurate clone of BX and thought the advanced fantasy rules and carcass crawler add a lot, though they still have the basic chassis of the original D&D ideas. It'll be interesting to see what people change for their home games. As an example, I usually do the following. No infravision for demi-humans, but moon vision for elves and low light vision for dwarves. 1d6 skill system, but it is a roll higher system rather than roll lower. HD for players is based on AD&D, so D4 to D12. Warriors get a D10, not a D8. And they would love an easy fix for making turn undead a spell and a well-costed and balanced spell point system for magic, but haven't found one yet. Okay, so at least they have at least one aim they want. I kind of wish they would just do there. Like, is there a spell point? I mean, spell points, I get it. They have a freedom, but I feel like you could probably just easily take. I don't know. I think switching out spell points or spell slots or spell points, isn't that in? I know some of the versions have that, maybe in the. I don't know if it's in the original Unearthed Arcana or in some of the. I feel like that option does pop up. That variant pops up from time to time. I kind of think you could just convert your slots to points and just have, a second level, like a first level spell slot is 1 point. A second level spell slot's 2 points, and then it casts 1 point per level of spell. Maybe you want to change it a little bit so that you're not. I don't know. I think that would work, right? I don't know. Or you may have to tweak it a bit, but something like that. Oh, good. Jonathan dropped the comment. Excellent. Ian says, I know someone who uses ArcGIS. Yeah, I've tried playing around with ArcGIS. I feel like it's kind of overkill, but it is interesting. Ian says they use Turn Undead as a cantrip clerical spell. Interesting. But does that change it much, Ian? So what's the advantage of running it as a cantrip? Presuming that if I'm thinking like a normal cantrip, you can cast it, or at least the modern conception of a cantrip that you can do it unlimited times. Or if it's a limited use cantrip, let me know. But I wonder, is it just that someone could, I guess, cast Dispel Magic if you're concentrating on turning undead, that someone could dispel you? Is that the advantage? What is the advantage of it if it's going to be an unlimited, presumably an unlimited cantrip, than just having it be an ability? I'm curious. See if anyone put anything. So someone likes Moon Vision. All right, I'm curious about the spells. I'd really like someone to do something interesting with psionics. I'm sure some folks have, but or maybe I should just do it myself, because I have this concept in my mind of what I would like psionics to be, and I feel like they get too caught up into this psionic combat kind of thing and all these complex, I'm gonna shield my mind and I'm gonna do these things, which is not really what I want out of psionics at all. Probably just need to write it myself, and I probably wouldn't call it psionics because I wouldn't want to get into all the morass. But I never played a psionics game I thought was like, ooh, it always just seems to be better as kind of this abstract idea than what it ends up being. Okay, so cantrips do cost. I see. All right, that makes a little bit more sense. So you can see I've been in here because I've already upvoted some things. I'm in the OSR. I'll see. There were some good things in here before. Let's see if there's anything coming. Otherwise, we can go back to the bigger roundup. The Space Opera starting a game, a new map. Yeah, I got that. Looking for Lord of the Rings style campaigns and modules. Well, you could probably just grab old MERP ones, but this might be. I remember seeing this. I think this is an interesting discussion because it is something that, especially for new GMs, is a quandary. How do you decide the difficulty of encounters in a sandbox, which was posted by Con R2112? I've designed a hex crawl adventure, about 20 hexes of things to do, but I'm lost on how to appropriately stock these locations with monsters. Obviously, I can't stock them all with challenges way too tough for the players or they won't do anything. But I don't want to make everything too easy. Just not sure how to go about doing this. So let me read some comments before I get into my own spiel. Fabitar says, you don't. Let your players experience a world that's not tailored to their abilities. Let them choose what to fight, avoid, and or run away from. Make your encounters believable, natural to the environment. Don't overthink it. Part of the fun is the feeling of dread. That feeling that you've transgressed into the lair of some terrible beast you have no chance of fighting head on. So you must be on your toes and think of alternate ways of getting from A to B alive. And then Khan, the OP, responds, right. But if every single quest is significantly higher than what they can deal with, then there will be nothing they can do. So obviously there has to be some stuff at their level, correct? And then Rain in Soho responds, the world will always have bandits and bears. And then Trick Ganesh says, and bears dressed in bandits and other foes' skin suits. Never seen that bear, but I like it. And then Gorak says, that's what the dungeon is for. Levels of the dungeon roughly correspond to the levels of PCs. Then Fabitar, who is the person who commented originally, says, the good thing about the design philosophy I just mentioned is it works both ways. Goblins and kobolds still have their place in everyday adventuring, even for high-level PCs. Think of it this way. What makes sense to be in this cave or town or mine or dungeon? Make encounter tables or find tables that suit your world and let the dice decide. Your players are sure to find fights they can win. Some will be a challenge. Some will be a chance to show off how experienced they've become. Some will be near impossible. And then level 2 janitor says, I generally have most things be at the PC starting level. The game world is stocked with normal people who are about as much a threat in combat as first level PCs. There's monsters too, but real nasty monsters aren't an everyday thing. Your average peasant on the way from one town to another isn't going to run into a manticore or a Medusa very often. Maybe some bandits, goblins, or a bear. Oh, the poor bears. Ian says they're working on a psionic talent too, calling it the Mentalist. Ooh, like the TV show, Ian? With that guy whose name I can't remember. Edward says, Shadow Dark covers magic and Turn Undead well. It is a good middle ground between memorization and spell slots. That's cool. I read through the Shadow Dark quick look. I confess to not heavily recalling it at the moment. So here's my take. I think what the first commenter I think got probably is about as close to probably my point of view as you can, though it can be what we might toss out and say, hey, just make it believable. Maybe it makes sense to us. It makes sense to me when I think about, you're not going to have 8 dragons next to each other. I mean, you might, but you'd have to think that's a special circumstance, because it just seems like that's too many dragons for that. I mean, assuming they're all not a family, they're all different types kind of thing. You think about, okay, it's just, that's too many, right? So you think maybe you have one dragon and then what might live underneath the dragon and so on and so forth. You also think about, well, you have these places that are settled by organized cultures, and those organized cultures, unless circumstances are special, cannot coexist next to something really dangerous. If there's a red dragon and the town is right next to the red dragon, if you're playing Dragon Slayer the game and the town is made to deal with the red dragon and are sacrificing people to the dragon every year so the dragon leaves them alone, that will work. But you need to think about that circumstance. So you can end up, you're starting to think about these things in your brain, and then I think you'll start to naturally see that, well, if I just have this string of farming villages here, it's got to be fairly secure. Otherwise, you'd have to have castles all over the place, so you'd have to have huge walls. And it's like, no, this is just kind of countryside with just some lovely idyllic farmland there. Well, then the most dangerous thing probably isn't that close. So then you might think, well, what is here? Well, you're going to have your wolves, and you're going to have the poor bears that apparently are getting just killed left and right for being mistaken for murderers. And you might have some other things, a white stag. You might have, but maybe very rarely would you have anything more dangerous or weird than that. But then you get a little bit further, and maybe there's a barrier of some kind, like a river or some hills, or in a forest that is foreboding and forbidding. And then maybe you go, oh, well, maybe there's dire wolves, and maybe there's more dangerous things in here, and it kind of up the ante. And I think if you can just get that mindset, that can help keep things straight. But ultimately, I just think it's really kind of a feel thing. I know some folks will say, they'll make some math and say, well, every hex, if you're next to town, then, maybe it's 1 HD type stuff, or lower than 1 HD. And then you can increase the HD as you move away into the wilderness. That might work too. But I think you just get a feel for it, and then you tend to find where you want to be. Inkpen's got a quick question. Do people want a nested hex flower that's printable? What nested scale? A nested hex flower that's printable. You mean like a blank one that we would fill ourselves, or one that we just want for reference? I'm kind of having trouble with a nested. So I can see the hex flower, and then there'd be another hex flowers inside the hex flower. So like 2. You have a link to something, Inkpen? I'd be happy to pull it up. Or if you've posted on OSR already, I could check it out. We could look at it visually, because I'm having trouble maybe seeing what that would actually look like. I mean, being able to print anything is kind of nice, I think. Even though I don't print a bunch of stuff out myself now, I could see myself wanting to. Ian says, players are dumb. They don't realize that all the barns are well built with slate roofs until they see the dragon on the wing. Retconning by encounter. Yep. I mean, I wouldn't have thought that either. I mean, it's one of those things, I suppose, if you wanted to do the whole, well, they grew up in this world and I didn't kind of thing, that you might say something like these. The roofs are all seem to be stone, have stone or have sort of anti-fire protection. It'd be interesting what other countermeasures they had. That'd be kind of a good question. Like if you had a setting that had a lot of, let's say, dragons, but not in the super intelligent D&D style, but more like, I'm not sure what kind of style dragons. More like, say, Dragon Slayer, though I feel like they kind of intimate that dragon's smart, and he's not stupid, but it seems more animalistic. It's not talking, it's not casting spells, it's not doing that thing. It'd be interesting to think about if you were in a world kind of like the How to Train Your Dragon kind of world. I guess maybe that's the closest analog of all these different types of dragons that are effectively wild animals. I know they end up coming to a nice symbiosis at the end of that first movie, but in the pre-times, when it's war between men and dragons and you're in close confines, you think of kind of all the interesting countermeasures you could do. Though, of course, there's so many different kinds of dragons. Sure, you have slate roofs, but that only works if the green dragon doesn't come and belch or was it black dragon belches acid? Whatever one belches acid. I think what green dragon's what poison? Who's lightning? I can't remember. Anyway, you could probably, it'd be interesting to think about if you had a particular dragon that was a real issue constantly, what kind of countermeasures places would take. And then you could kind of add that to your world building. So, slate roofs and maybe other things to, to prevent. I'm not sure how you prevent it. Like maybe those kind of spikes that you see, here in New York City, you'll see where ledges, sometimes they'll put, you'll have a ledge and they'll put essentially little metal, like a line of metal spikes and kind of like a porcupine sort of on the ledge. And that's so that the pigeons don't roost there. So you can think about, well, would they have slate roofs? Would they have kind of spikes so that the dragon can't land on the house? Maybe heavy foundations so the swing of the tail doesn't just bash everything in from below. It kind of be neat. Or maybe you go underground at that point. I don't know. Though, of course, a good flame blast, gotta have some good ventilation, but could be some interesting stuff. Yeah, Brian Smith, that was exactly it. Spikes so they don't roost like pigeons. Yep, bear traps on the roofs. Okay, ink pen on the hex flower says just sub hexes inside hexes. I see. I guess ink pen, if it's I like the sub hexes in the hex. I guess it depends on the use case. I think if I was going to have so you have, let's say you have, assuming you're doing this for mapping and not for, again, I'm going to assume this is for a mapping purpose hex flower. I'd have to see it if it was like a weather generator hex flower. If it's something that I am filling in, I think it's nice for regions where I'm zooming in on to have a pre-made hex with subhex. So I go, okay, here's the forest hex, and then I'm zooming in, and now I have, I don't know, a somewhat more detail if I needed about what goes where. I wouldn't want that for every hex because I think they're just adding a lot of work for not enough payoff. But certainly it's something to print or to have as some kind of PDF where I can maybe, duplicate the page. And then if I'm using, digital tools like in Draw on, would be something that works. Ian says that in their game, dragons are cowards or perhaps cautious, make too much trouble, and the armies and dragon slayers start causing problems. I mean, there is that too, right? That's what's going to draw people. It is an interesting concept if your world has, if you're playing, especially in kind of the standard old school sort of D&D world where there are fairly high level characters, NPCs running around. I mean, they're not that rare in terms of the leaders and sort of things that they're kind of high level. That if you make a bunch of trouble, then you're going to get the folks coming to sort of root you out. So you got to kind of play it a little bit slick. But if you're playing in a system and if you're playing in a world that is more tamped down and it's more rare for there to be that, then maybe it makes more sense that you have dragons that are more tyrannical and outwardly, threatening. And this is, I don't know if I mentioned it, but I'm back to my Spindrift Blood Orange Tangerine for the working man. In RuneQuest, in areas where there are giant problems, their huts have spiked support poles. Yep, I believe it. Big nets they can launch and pull up. I think it's a neat idea. Okay, what else we got here? Well, this might be interesting. I need to go back and look at, somebody told me last week, was it, that Mythic came out with version 2 of their book, and I'm guessing other materials, and apparently it's got some nice upgrades. I have Mythic version 1 in PDF that I use fairly often. Maybe I'll have to see if I can get a hold of it and do a read on it. All right, this is posted by MXFC. They just played Shadowdark for the first time. They did it solo with the Mythic GM emulator deck. I've been thinking about this game more or less since the Kickstarter launched, but haven't actually been able to play with anyone yet, so I just tried my hand at it solo. The game has a real-time torch timer system, which really ramped up the tension at the end of the session. Wow, the last few times I played it solo, it's been 5th edition, and there's pretty much an entire session just to roll up a main character and use an online random character generator to make a sidekick. In Shadowdark, I rolled up my main character, a fighter named Thandin, then used shadowdarklings.net to generate a sidekick, priest named Thur, and it just took me 20 minutes. Then I got down into it by starting to play the Concealed Abbey of the Dragonfly Horde, the dungeon Kelsey the Game's author wrote live on YouTube a few weeks ago. As my main characters approached the entrance, Thandon was disoriented by the buzzing coming from within the temple. They poked around the statue with its eyes made of gems, but did not touch thanks to a mythic draw and the characters being there to root out the cult, not to loot. Well, maybe loot later if there's time. As the two approached the dead body at the end of a hall, a vine snake fell on Thandon. You'll find out he has the worst luck. The three tussle until Turn throws the snake to the floor and chops it in half with a sword. I award 1 XP to each of them and check the timer. 30 minutes of torchlight left. Then, I rolled for loot. In the adventure, this body had a 1 in 6 chance of there being treasure on it. I rolled a 6. I then rolled on the Shadow Dark 0 to 3 level treasure table and got a bundle of 5 red dragon scales. I go to Mythic because I have to pretty much and ask if there's anything magical about these scales. I say it is very unlikely, and since the chaos factor was at 4, this meant that in order to get a confirmation that these were magical, I would have to turn over 4 yeses. Not only did I do that, but they were all exceptional yeses, which I interpreted to mean that they were magical as F. I also interpreted that maybe I had not shuffled the deck enough. C'est la vie, the cards had spoken. I turned over 2 cards to get a description of the magic the scales contained. Naturally lavish. I interpreted this as being of natural beauty. I went to the dragon section of the Shadow Dark Core rulebook, read the flavor text of all 6 dragon types, and decided that of those 6, the forest dragons sounded the most beautiful and connected with nature. I retconned the dragon scales to be green and gave the scales each a use of the forest dragon's animate plants ability. Level 4 consumes 1 scale, and boom, I got a sick magic item, which these guys are going to need. At this point, there is about 15 minutes of timer left. They didn't find out any other clues from the body and then climbed down a level to where they heard people talking from earlier. The talking stopped because Mythic decided the snake fighting was loud enough to attract attention, and the Croak folk had retreated behind the door in the Grand Hall. As Thandon is descending on a rope, he is overtaken yet again by the intense buzzing sound. He loses his grip on the rope and falls 20 feet, taking 6 points of damage, much more than my little 4 hit point buddy can handle. Thur begins his descent. As he does, the torch he is wielding begins to flicker. I check time, and there's only 8 minutes of torch time left. He makes it down safely and is able to cast Cure Wounds just by the skin of his teeth, rolling a 12 on a DC 11 spellcasting check. Thandon is awakened and back to full health. It's just at that moment that the torch timer ran out and the torch winks away. Thur was too distracting trying to heal Thandon that he lost track of it. Now they find themselves in complete darkness, and the Croak folk are about to burst through the door. And that's it. I couldn't come up with a better cliffhanger ending if I tried. Anyways, I love this game and the community that has quickly sprung up around it. I can't wait to see Kelsey play it with Mythic soon. If you're thinking of trying a solo, I think you should. It was really easy to just get playing, which is always the thing that trips me up the most. I'm hoping to carve out some time in the next week to keep going with it. All right. Whew. I'm giving an upvote. I don't know. It's like I can't. There's no downvote option, which is interesting. Is it locked or something? Okay. So that's a cool story. You know, I'm Shadow Dark. It's fine. I'm really fascinated by the folks that just seem to be in love with it. And I guess I understand it more from the 5th edition side of things and the OSR side of things, because I read it as I read the quick start, and it seemed fine. It seemed perfectly well. But it didn't fire me up in such a way. I don't know. It felt kind of like a greatest hits of OSR or NSR innovations applied to a 5th edition friendly base, which look good for them. That definitely struck a chord and it hit a spot. And I haven't read 5 Torches. Was it 5 Torches Deep or whatever? So I don't know the other types of other offering that's in that space. But hey, great for them. But it's just interesting to read folks who seem to be coming it, I guess, potentially, or maybe not from the OSR side of things and just being all agog about it. Because I'm just wondering, again, I haven't played it, so maybe it just comes together an amazing package when I'm going, a lot of the stuff I kind of do already, and I just do it with BX, and I'm fine. But I'm glad it's going to bring a lot of folks into the OSR or NSR space. And it's cool to see folks just wanting to be really excited to play, which is always nice. So fired up, they're just heading in solo. And it's a cool little story there. It's pretty nice. Ryan Smith says character creation that involved as part of the gameplay at that point. Yeah, if you have to spend a whole session creating your character, I think that's what speaks to that, how you end up moving away from things wanting that the lethality of things in an OSR sense when you're in 5th edition. If it's going to take you a whole session to create a character, then I think it demands the character be a little bit more durable than in the OSR, because you just put in a lot of work, and then if you're going to lose it in the next session, not that you shouldn't be able to, but it just seems like you're asking the player to do a lot. So you want to kind of try to preserve some way as possible that is some ability for them to enjoy that character before it goes away. Now, if you spend 5 minutes making one and then it dies in 5 minutes, that seems to be less of a deal. Oh, let's see. Okay. I don't think anything interesting. Not really. But cool. Oh, that was in the solo. Okay, so we went cross. This was cross posted. Looking for a summary of clones. I'm not interested in that. How to run an OSR campaign. Is this I'm kind of curious. Is this just a general question? This was submitted by careless_toe 2676. How to run an OSR campaign. That's a big question. Careless_toe 2676. Hi. To give you a bit of context, I started playing D&D 5th edition, their first TTRPG, during COVID, and I fell in love with it a bit at the same time. D&D 5th edition was not exactly perfect for me. I find it a bit easy, not so challenging. Some rules are too restrictive, and I hate the constant special attacks like an anime that each class gives. Not exactly sure what that means. Then I found out OSR. It looks like everything that I was looking for, and I decided to grab a copy of OSE. I decided that I want to try to referee a campaign too, but I'm stuck with one simple question. How can I make a campaign for people that become heroes and not superheroes, so no saving the world, that embraces the opportunity of adventures in multiple different dungeons that still keeps sense? I'm scared that it will never feel like a full campaign, but like a sequence of one-shots, or that it becomes the regular save-the-world adventure. So basically, what's a good glue that can keep everything together without an escalation to the Avengers? Well, I mean, because there's a couple things. I think you can do the saving of the world thing and not end up with the Avengers. Again, Fellowship of the Ring. I say again. I need to stop saying again all the time. Fellowship of the Ring, Lord of the Rings, they save the world. They're not the Avengers. Maybe you could argue they're close to the Avengers when it gets to Return of the King, but I don't know. Frodo and Sam are never... I mean, Frodo's superpower is merely just being able to withstand the bombardment of the ring, and Sam is being stalwart. Merry has a magic sword that does a good trick when he needs it to, but then he's kind of knocked out. I guess Aragorn, yeah, maybe he's the Captain of America of the bunch, and sure, you've got Gandalf, who is, I guess, would be your Doctor Strange, or maybe Thor as a demigod kind of thing, but essentially not... they're not really superpowered. Hey, Ian. Take it easy. Back to the coffin. So you can have the saving the world without being the image, but assuming you don't want saving the world, you don't want it to be that overarching. You can have smaller adventures, smaller scales, not the world. Maybe you're just saving the valley, the country, the county that the party is in. I think what makes a bunch of you can really block everything out into one shots or specific scenarios. I could certainly do that with Lord of the Rings. You have these little adventures. Frodo gets to Bree. Frodo gets to Bree, or Frodo. You could even have Frodo gets to the elves. I mean, talking when he meets the elves in the woods, or Frodo gets to wherever. Frodo escapes goes through the Barrows. Frodo gets to Tom Bombadil. Like each little segment of the trip, you could almost zoom in and break it up into another segment. But what makes these segments part of a greater whole than just little one-shots is the fact that there's a greater whole that they're a part of. Conan generally goes on these little one-shot adventures, and there isn't really much any through point really running between them. It's just you pick up story number one. Oh, Conan's drunk in a bar, and someone needs him to do something, and he says to do it. Okay, fine. Story number two. Oh, Conan's in jail for doing something goofy, and the local lord needs somebody to break him out. All right, that's fine. Conan's a pirate, and their boat gets shipwrecked. None of these things really have much to do with each other. And maybe there's some shadowy thing of whether it takes place in some time in Conan's life where he's younger, older, in between. But generally, they're all separate. But you could probably come up with something to give them some kind of forward animus that, okay, he starts off 0, right? Okay, Conan's in the bar, he's drunk, someone gets him to do something. and then whatever, maybe it turns out that because of everything that Conan, like he'll do a lot of these stories, maybe ends up on the run with the MacGuffin in his hand, let's say. But then the next time he's running and he gets captured. He gets captured because he goes to the borders of some kingdom and he's got this MacGuffin, which he hides. And now he has to escape. And now the other lord's coming to get the lord's coming to the one he sort of double crossed, or whatever happened, is now on his way with the MacGuffin. So now Conan has limited time to get out. And so that's eventually he's got to get out. He's maybe has to get back the MacGuffin and escape before this Thulsadun, whatever character, sorcerer from somewhere, wherever, catches up to him. And of course, where does he end up in? He ends up on the coast, and he realizes he has to get this thing to someone else to figure something else about it. So that's how he ends up on the pirate ship, as he decides that, hey, I can't pay for passage because I'm broke, but I need to get out of here. So I'll get in with some pirates and try to get closer to wherever I need to take this MacGuffin, to hide it, destroy it, get something about it. So I'm not saying this is a great plot, but there you have an overarching plot that's moving, and now these things are connected together. And of course, you could be more thoughtful about it and figure something a little bit about better than I just did in 30 seconds. But really, that's the thing. Things are moving around. The world is affected, and the world is changed through all these things. You're not treating them as completely separate. You're treating them as part of the same fabric. So when Conan, let's say, when he's escaping the castle where he was captive, and he blows the thing up with whatever casks of, I don't know, gunpowder or something, essentially, and he blows it up, then the next segment later on in the town, things are happening when he's at the port town that are because of there was an explosion over there and things are happening. And so that will also link things together. Not only do you have the same antagonists and the same factions that are pushing things through these adventures, but then what's happening in those past adventures is affecting the present and will affect the future. Brian Smith says, can go after personal character goals rather than the goal being to save the world. Yeah, that's sure. But I don't know if that's going to make you feel like, I mean, maybe that will make you feel like it's more connected. If you're accomplishing goals that lead to something, it might. I tend to think of it as that you want that dynamism in the world. Certainly the things you're doing in the world can be more narrative or more about personal achievement, or however you want to do it. But I tend to think that where the connection comes in is that things that the idea that everything's part of a canvas that's connected, that what you do over here affects what's happening over here and affects these things happening over here. And these things are sort of talking to each other in a way that makes sense. And when you think of a bottle episode on a TV show, it usually just ends where everything's begun, right? Oh, one of those monster of the week things on the X-Files, whatever happens on that episode, it's fine. But at the end of it, Fox and Scully, Mulder and Scully are going to basically end up where they started, back at FBI headquarters. Nothing has really happened, right? Oh, they had this experience, but if they didn't have it, the world would be exactly the same. Whereas I think what makes the other ones, when you have the narrative episodes, is things are changing, and those changes feel, permanent. Brian Smith says, or make dark in tone where the heroes can't really save the world. Yeah, sure. I mean, you can riff on lots of things. That's going to be very much up to your table style and sort of what you're looking for as a group. I tend to think that the option, you don't need to make it dark. I don't think, you can just, the option should probably exist that you can't save the world, but there's a chance. I mean, that it's not a foregone conclusion that you could fail at Mount Doom or whatever it is. I don't know if I need to pre-bake that in. Just by its nature as a game that we're playing out and not something that's pre-written, there's going to be that chance for failure unless you literally bake it out of all the mechanics. But you can also play with the idea of what does it mean to save the world? In some, I'm trying to think if there was a movie I liked that did this, but basically, I guess it was Terminator Salvation, which is not a great movie, but whatever, it's okay. Part of the thing there was the Terminator had convinced a young adult John Connor, I guess. I think that was it, or the kid. No, he was like the kid, Sarah Connor's kid, that he could, kind of save the world. But the Terminator's real thing was that this timeline with the computer, whatever, the computer takeover, AI self-awareness thing, that whole apocalypse was happening. So his goal was really to get them through it so that they would be there on the other side so that they could do the things they need to do to save humanity. So the kids going through the movie thinking they're going to go stop it, they're going to save the world, and the Terminator's real thing is like, I'm not here to stop it because it can't be stopped. What I'm here to do is to make sure you get to where you need to be, which I thought was a neat idea. Any amazing comments here. Quietus87 says, just run a sandbox campaign. Forget about your campaign having a beginning and end or a fixed party or a central goal. Create an environment with its places, people, problems. Throw the players in, give them enough hooks to whet their appetite. Let them interact with the world around them, and then make them suffer the consequences of their action. For me, that's the old school and most organic way of running a campaign. I mean, and that's fine advice. I'm not averse to having some kind of thing happening. That you're in a world and the world's at war, and now your things you're doing are kind of fitting with that. I like it as a player when you have this kind of backdrop of things happening where you're not. Stasis is kind of fine as a starting point also, but I kind of like that there's something happening. Now, this is not to say that the party has to engage into something the way you think. It's not, oh, world war is happening, we need to pick a side. Like, no, you could be doing good, the bad, and the ugly, and the war's happening, and you're just maneuvering around it. But I kind of think having something like that is nice. And then it really allows you, I think, to play with different elements and see kind of where your party lies. But there's certainly nothing wrong with just saying, here's your sandbox, here's a bunch of stuff, just go. Go to, let's see, what else? Dusty Bottoms 00 says, don't write the arc ahead of time and don't think the world has to be ending to have an impact on it. One-shots at smaller stakes can easily all be tied together with minimal work. Villains and factions come along for the ride. Characters develop story arcs as they play rather than as a backstory. The players start writing the story for themselves with their choices. We've been running campaigns that were just as satisfying and sometimes just as grandiose. Taming griffins, building kingdoms, rescuing dead party members from hell since the 70s and 80s. Even 5e games aren't required to have Avengers-level behavior and Thanos-level world-shaking problems. They can be smaller, more organic. That's just what we're seeing in media. It isn't how all tables work, though. Good stuff. And I agree. Oh, let's see. You know where I'm going to go? Let's see what's in the, let's get some blogging. Let's see if there's any good bloggy things going on. Bloggy. Only 19? Okay. Well, Chicago Wizard has posted the 3 essential elements of the perfect D&D village, town, or city. This is posted to Chicago Wiz's blog spots. That's chgowiz-games.blogspot.com. And it's dated May 12th. The 3 essential elements of the perfect D&D village or town or city. Heh. How clickbaity can I make that title? But I'm dead serious with this. There are 3 things that, in my experience, PCs tend to care about in a town, a village, or a city, or anywhere they make their home base. Take care of these 3 things, and you don't need to create a 300-page tome filled with houses that nobody is ever going to visit anyway. So the first is a place for PCs to sell their crap. Second, a place for PCs to buy things to help them get more crap. And the third, a place for PCs to get information or quests to get more crap. I've never gone wrong with this as a way of just whipping up a civilized location on the spot or getting something ready for game day. Now, to be sure, as PCs poke around more and decide they want to settle down, I'll add more stuff. If they want to see a sage or a wizard or find out who that suspicious lady with the cats was who told them to go seek out the 3 little fae that dance around in the starlight on the midsummer's night, then I can add those in. I have a town called Skullfear that has been in play in some form or fashion since 2009. Part of my AD&D campaign. I recently moved all my notes on Skullfear to a format that I've settled on over the years. Want to know how many keyed locations there are on the map for a town that's seen players explore quite a bit? 14. That's for a small city of 8,000 people. 3 of those locations are for rule number 1. 5 are for rule number 2 and include rule number 1 as well. 7 are for rule number 3. Only 1 is something that I'd call all, quote, all role-playing, unquote. The location of a sculptor so she could create a statue of a beloved NPC in a village that wanted to honor his sacrifice to true love. I guess the upshot of this is to always keep your prep focused on what's going to make your table work and move. If you're basing your examples of civilized locations on the modules, That's a bit unfair because they were written to sell. So having a lot of words fill pages and make the module seem, I don't know, like it's worth your 5 quatlus. Or maybe they had a word count they just wanted to reach. Regardless, whether while city modules or supplements are great resources, I don't think they're great examples of what you absolutely need to prep on your own. They are written to sell. You're writing to have stuff to do at your game table. Generate what's important. Have an idea of how you will figure out additional NPCs or locations if necessary. Use a random table. Have some standard templates that you just use. Go back to that $25 book, $5 PDF, and steal liberally. I don't know. I'm not your dad. I can't tell you how to do it. P.S. Thanks to Alexander Schroeder and Peter Epp for inspiring today's blog post. This is good stuff. Yeah, I think those are all 3. I mean, the only one, and usually I would say number 3 goes hand in hand, is somewhere to stay. But usually the place where you're staying and the place where you're getting information tends to be that kind of inn tavern. So they kind of end up being somewhat one and the same. Funny enough, sorry, I'm clicking my chair's armrest to get them in a better spot. My party doesn't engage so much with number 2, mostly because in my game I don't have magic item shops or anything like that. So, we can kind of do that. They spend a lot of time trying to figure out the informational part. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I always think, prep the least you need. And that, I mean, I've said this many times. When I look at those city maps and stuff, I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm never going to use it. I don't need to know, because I kind of just think get a couple of neighborhoods or districts. And I even think those can be overblown. I haven't done some kind of study, but I don't know how many districts you need. Because like, the smuggling district of this district, like, I don't even know that's much. East, west, north, south, east, west, maybe. Maybe if it's a big city, you might have maybe some based on religion. You can have some fun with some of those divisions, how they've divided the city and what it means. But yeah, I tend to agree. They're gonna need somewhere to buy and sell. You could probably combine 1 into 2, and somewhere commerce, right? Commerce, and then commerce information authority might be another way to do it, right? Somewhere to buy and sell, somewhere to get info, and then maybe some kind of authority. I want to see the local lord, something like that, or the local bishop, or whatever it is, the king. And that's kind of all you need. And just make a note and then move on. I would really like to see how some folks, I guess for myself, use these really ornate city maps, because I certainly can't imagine wanting to spend a lot of time literally, okay, you come to Main Street and you turn left, and then you find Acorn Street and take a right, and then you find Maple Street and you take another right, and then you're on the Merchant's Way and you take a left, and then it's 5 blocks and you get to the square of the Prancing Pony, and then you turn this way. Like, it's maybe the first time if I really wanted to paint the scene of this place, but I don't want to do that every time. I really probably wouldn't want to do that once. I would just talk about moving through different areas, but I'd more abstractly. If you're in a richer area, you're moving from the docks, which is seedy and it smells of salt air, but also of lye, and then you're in this other area and this is it. And then you're getting into where this richer sort of merchants and things, that's kind of how I would tend to position it, and not turn by turn GPS style things. And then if I'm not doing turn by turn GPS style things, then what do I need this map for that's giving me basically all the city blocks in the city? I don't know. And I'm not trying to say that, I'm not trying to, I'm throwing no shade on people who use it. And like I said, I'd like to see how people use that. It's just, it ain't for me. But that was Chicago Wiz. And that was good. Let's see what else we've got. I upvoted that. AI on the mind. BX Raw Fighter versus Halfling. Well, this might be interesting. Let's see. Okay, this is the Alchemist Nocturne. E at the end of nocturne.blogspot.com. Was posted on May 9th. BX Raw Fighter versus Halfling. Are Halflings just better than fighters? They share the same XP and attack progression. Armor for Halflings is only limited by the availability of Halfling-sized gear, which depends on the setting, I guess. Let's put the advantages of each one towards the other. Fighters. Can use two-handed weapons that lose initiative anyways. Use of the D8 longsword is ambiguous, though I'd rule that halflings can only use short swords. If not using the variable weapon die at this point is ruled obsolete. I wouldn't necessarily say that, but I feel like they're giving two-handed weapons short shrift, but I guess that's kind of dependent on rules. They can use all magic swords that happen to be not short. Use a D8 for hit points instead of D6. That is 1 puny point on average per level. Fighters can even roll badly and lose that edge. 1 prime attribute instead of 2, strength and dex, which is irrelevant if you roll the minimum dex or if you happen to ignore prime attributes like I do. No level cap, which has no relevance until level 8. Halflings. Saving throw equal to fighter, 7 levels above you. Shooting arrows or ranged weapons at +1. That is attacking like a fighter 1 level above you at all times, sometimes 2 levels. Armor class enhanced by 2 versus enemies larger than humans. This is a surprisingly large spectrum in a game like D&D, from bears to basilisks to ogres to dragons. When using individual initiative, they get a +1. They have a 90% chance of disappearing in woods or underbrush. 1 in 3 chance of hiding in normal light when there are shadows or cover present, as long as they remain still. Non-despicable advantage of being lightweight. It's much easier to take out of the dungeon an unconscious or deceased halfling. It's going to be, I don't know if anyone's really doing that math. So the next paragraph says, this all started because I was running a game following strict raw rules and went looking into the book to check if there were any strength or encumbrance caps for hobbits and found nothing. I started reading to check how the fact that you are a 90-centimeter person is portrayed in the context of combat and such, and I realized that there's no real downsides at all. Suddenly I found it so weird. My last house rules are too complex to be summarized like now, but basically I run them as thieves with better saving throws, like a fighter 4 levels above, with strength capped at 12 and encumbrance based on strength. I tend to make a full post about them soon. Just remember that 12 dwarves picked up a hobbit once because they needed a thief to go into a dragon slayer. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I never really considered it. It does. I mean, the advantages make sense. The non-human races classes or species classes, I think, do have an advantage if you don't feel like you're going to make it to high levels, which means that if your stats are dodgy, you might want to look at getting an elf, a dwarf, or a halfling because your stats are dodgy. If you have good stats, you might want to try human and see if you can get them up to those high levels where humans start to kind of pull out ahead. Two-handed weapons. I think the thing is I have to separate, because he's talking about raw, and I forget, it's really hard to remember all the time between stuff that he has come in from other editions or I've just house ruled myself or whatnot. I do give there are certain advantages to two-handed weapons depending on how you play, such as, yes, you're going to go last in the second or third round of combat, but in the first round of combat, if you're ready, you go first against anything smaller than you. So when that halfling's running up against the fighter who's got a two-handed bastard sword, they're going to have to eat that bastard sword first before they get in with their short sword. And then that's not including stuff like if you have pikes and halberds and other pole arms that can attack from the second rank. You can't do that as a halfling. You're just too short. Whereas the fighter, you can have your halfling in front and the fighter could be poking over the top. So there's stuff like that you might look at and say, oh, this is good or bad. Of course, if you have only halfling fighters as your front line, you're probably not blocking anybody's shot from hitting somebody behind you. It's not as a raw rule, but I am assuming that you'd have to come up with something of, well, if a full human can give cover behind it to someone else, but if you're only half tall and the other person's not laying down or on their knees, then some of those benefits are lost too. So there's some situational things, but looking at it just purely raw, yeah, it's an interesting point. And I would definitely veer towards thieves as an analog for halflings than fighters. Nice little thought experiment. Hey, there's me. Oh, let's see. Oh, something I found out. So my daughter had a science fair, kind of a science and art fair yesterday. Part of why I didn't stream yesterday is because I wanted to make sure I was free and clear to go to that. Now, one of the other dads, they had a couple kids. Their kids are actually not in my daughter's grade or class, but it's when you're in a neighborhood like I am, you end up, even if you have kids who aren't necessarily in the exact same grade, you can end up running into them and their families quite a bit. And I've talked to this dad off and on, but I tend to just see him at odd times. We haven't really exchanged information, but I know he's a role player, and I remember last time he was playing through Gloomhaven, and he was starting a D&D campaign, and now that I talked to him again, he's been running Ravenloft. But the thing is, he said that, which kind of blew my mind a little bit, was he had run, or he just played in a game of Burning Wheel. And I was like, Burning Wheel? Like, that's on my list of like games I want to play. And it turns out that another dad at the school is friends with Luke Crane. And he gave me the guy's name, and I pulled out my Burning Wheel Codex this morning and looked through the playtesters, and sure enough, this guy's name is in the playtesters for Burning Wheel. So I'm going to try. So I don't know this other dad. I'm going to try to see if I can get a hold of him to maybe see if I can get in on some Burning Wheel. Heck, if I can swing it, maybe I'll have to see if I can make contact with Luke Crane. But I thought that was really kind of cool because he mentioned, we're talking about Ravenloft, that he's playing Curse of Strahd, and he's running it. And they said something like, hey, have you ever heard of this game Burning Wheel? And I'm like, yeah, that's not a game I would imagine would have come up. It's not exactly a mainstream game like, oh, D&D, Burning Wheel. But I thought that was fun. Let's see if I can get one more in here just to cap things off. This is it for this week. Let's see. Old School Mass Combat 1. This might be good. Posted at the Methods and Madness. That's Methods ET, aka French for and. Probably other languages also. Methods at madness.blogspot.com. Dated May 1st. Old School Mass Combat 1. The basics. Attacking, taking damage, and saving throws. Can I bump this up? I think I can. Let's see. Bump up the sizing here. The idea started here, but you can definitely skip the other posts. Good, because don't have time to read them now. This is a straightforward rewrite that will be easier to understand, while the other posts were mostly brainstorming. Okay, so let's get to the meat of it. My goal is creating a mass combat system that fulfills the following criteria as much as possible. And he's got some bullet points here. Perfectly compatible with BX. Minimal conversion needed. Avoid approximations. AC4 and AC5 are different things, and having 5 HP is better than 4. Results that are similar to any individual combat. No new units needed. Use any humanoid or monster in the book. Avoiding new mechanics such as using 1d6 or 2d6 for attack rolls. Miniatures and maps are optional. You can go full theater of the mind if desired. All right, so he's got some. This is not no small task. Notice that most existing systems do not fulfill these criteria, including chainmail and other cool systems that use 2d6 attacks. Okay, just as a point, chainmail came out first. So it's not chainmail's fault that OD&D went from 2d6 to 1d20. For the record, it's like chainmail it wasn't inventing new mechanics on top of what it had. It's D&D did that. Okay, other cool systems that use 2d6 attacks, 1d6 attacks, or different armor values. For example, in my system, AC, damage, etc. is kept exactly the same. First, we are proposing two systems. You can use either or both depending on the circumstances. The first system, Detailed, uses units of 20 individuals as a starting point and has very precise results when compared to individual attacks. The second system, Freeform, uses any number of individuals. It is easier to use, but the results do not map perfectly to individual attacks. These two systems are for calculating damage output. Every other rule, taking damage, morale, fighting individual NPCs and PCs and NPCs, etc., applies equally no matter which system you choose. To be honest, as a fan of minimalism, I'm very close to just abandoning the detailed system altogether. Skip to the second one if you want. I want to know the detailed system. So here we go. A detailed system. Start with units of 20 NPCs per unit. When a unit attacks a monster or other units, it doesn't make an attack roll. Instead, it's simply rolls for damage. The damage caused by a score every turn is equal to the damage caused by the individual multiplied by 21 minus THAC0 plus armor class. All right, here we go. So here's the example. A unit of veterans, for example, causes 1d8 times 2 plus AC against a target with AC 4. They cause 6d8 damage per round. All right, so let's see this again. 1d8 times 2 plus armor class. So 2 plus armor class is 6. So 68 per round. I guess I see. Okay. If you're using ascending AC and attack bonus instead of THAC0, the formula is NPC damage times 21 plus ascending attack bonus minus AC. The results are exactly the same, e.g. the veterans cause 68 damage, etc. If you want units of 100, 200, or 1,000, just multiply the damage by 5, 10, or 50 as appropriate. Smaller units should divide damage as appropriate. One possibility could be just attacking as normal until you reduce to 10 NPCs and only then reduce damage by half. Units of 13 or 17 are possible, but the math gets harder. Roll damage, divide by 20, and multiply by 13 or 8 or 17. You can use approximations if you want, e.g. a unit of 6 or 7 just deals 1/3 of the original damage. Move on to the freeform system or fall back to individual attacks when there are few NPCs left. I feel like you could probably simplify this more. But I'm not sure how I would do that. But I feel like that's still a little bit more complicated than I think you'd need to be if you're going to, for this kind of thing. Just keep armor class as some kind of defense. Maybe just make it using the armor class, but it's just going to absorb that much damage. Something like that. I don't know. I'll have to have a think on it. So here's the freeform system. In the freeform system, the damage of a unit is equal to the sum of all individual damage averaged and divided by 3. For a unit of 20 veterans, it will be 30. For example, 20d8 average 90 divided by 3. To hit, simply make 3 separate attack rolls. Each successful attack inflicts 30 points of damage. 3 is an arbitrary number, of course. You might as well divide the total of damage by 10 or 20 and roll as many dice, but 3 attacks are enough for me. Okay. I guess. I don't know. Trying to think how we do that. Interesting. So you can, and then if you do it thirds, then you would divide, when you lose a third, then you might just reduce to 2 attacks. That's fine. Taking damage, when a unit takes damage, just divide it evenly to see how many NPCs are down. A group of 20 veterans, 4 hit points per NPC, taking 30 damage, loses 7 individuals. Excess damage is discarded. And then saving throws using the same reasoning. And that's about it. Interesting. I don't know. They love it. Simon says this is great. I have to mess around with it. I like the idea of it. And I think lots of folks at times want some mass combat rules. I kind of wish there was less add, multiply, subtract, divide in there and come up with some way. I mean, there's going to be some. I get it. Because I think one of the things, though, that maybe you're missing is that generally when you're playing in units, you end up playing in blocks. Okay, so you're doing, so if you go to a war game and you're like, oh, I got this. Sometimes you have blocks of like multiples of multiples. Basically, you just get down to when this block of units, however many, each, 10 figures to a man, and I've got this block. And sometimes in war games, like they're literally attached together. So that block is just there. It's like the block goes from being like, yeah, we're still functioning, in which case we're basically acting as normal, or basically the whole thing's removed. And I would probably do that and say, hey, whatever your 20 unit is, that unit is basically one figure. And once that unit, whatever gets damaged beyond a certain point, it's like, it's okay. And then you're just off the board and not try to worry about it. Now you're down to 16 units and then you're doing different sorts of math. I would probably try to do something like that. And I'm not a huge war gamer. I've really never war gamed before, but I've read a bunch of war game rules. So I kind of have the basics down. And maybe this could use a pass through, like looking at kind of what war games do and say, okay, we're going to use some of those abstractions that war games are already using, but we're going to, instead of coming up with whole new things, we're going to lean in on the AC damage dice and things like that. And I think you could do, you could probably just have roll the dice, right? Roll my damage die. If my damage die is more than this, then this thing happens. Like, I feel like you could probably even make it super simple. Now, granted, the more simple you make it, the more you're going to end up with some oddities, but it is what it is. Well, folks, I think I'm going to call this a stream. We've gone an hour and 11, so I think that's a good number. If you give a thumbs up on your way out, that'd be awesome. If you found yourself in here and not subscribed, and you feel like subscribing, that would also be awesome. I am going to, just to reiterate, I'm going to put a call out for magic items I will put it on the community tab. I'm going to ask people to go to the forums to leave magic items in there if you want, and then we can maybe, if we get enough in there, that maybe next week we'll have at least spend some of the stream looking at stuff from the community, magic items that folks have made, and talk about them and share them. So if you got a magic item that you love or hate or love to hate, look out for my post and then drop it in there, and then we could talk about it. Because I'd love to do on these streams, do a lot more of stuff that you guys have done than just kind of rando stuff on the internet. And of course, if you've got articles or other things that you've written or that you've read that you think could use some highlighting or just are interesting, please send them my way. Always need material. And with that, everybody have a great weekend, or great anytime you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, everybody, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.